It warms my heart to see everybody connecting with the people at your table. I hope that everybody's having a great chance to engage in what appears to be very rigorous dialogue while eating. Okay? Here's your chance just now to eat for a little while. As people are going to be coming back in, I'm going to introduce our lunch speaker. It's with a great pleasure that I get to introduce Robin West today. He's someone I've watched throughout this town give many, many provocative and very thoughtful speeches. He has worked, I have notes actually, but I'm going to try to do this off the top of my head with what I know about you. So Robin has been a thought leader in his work as founder, and I think you were chairman of your board, president, something important, pretty much everything. He's embodied the heart and soul of PFC Energy. So how many people are familiar with PFC Energy or use it as a part? Yes. So about four. How about IHS Sarah? Because IHS Sarah actually bought PFC not all that long ago. And Robin sort of went into retirement, but I don't buy that for a minute because he's more active than ever. He is a senior advisor, which is sort of an ambiguous title. I've had that title myself. And it doesn't really reflect enough what he does. He is with the Center for Strategic and International Studies in the energy group that's there, and continues to be a thought leader in geopolitical energy trends. In particular, I brought, this is a little light reading for you guys, okay? But if you're interested, he has a chapter in energy and security, and this is an excellent, excellent book on a lot of the emerging geopolitical trends within the energy sector right now. So he's going to be focusing a little bit more on big picture energy stuff, but I think a little on social license to operate as well. Is that right?
Yep.
Let me see if I left anything out here. He's also been involved in advising numerous administrations over the years. And I think that's to the credit of the people who brought him into that position. So it's always been a great pleasure for me to hear Robin, and you get to share in hearing him speak today. Thank you, Robin. And without further ado.
Thank you. Well, thank you. If my luncheon speech doesn't put you to sleep, I assure you that chapter in that long book will. You come to this group and use the word accident. It usually is a cause of alarm. But it really was a happy accident for me that got me involved in the offshore oil industry. Long ago and far away, in the Ford administration, worked at the Pentagon and the White House. And then when the Reagan administration came along, I was interested in doing the defense budget position, which I didn't get. I was later offered it, but turned it down because I was then involved in oil. But instead, I was offered a position of Assistant Secretary of the Interior for Policy, Budget, Administration, which I declined. But the then Secretary of the Interior, James Watt, gave me some very good advice, and this is a man who is not well known for sound judgment. At any rate, but he told me, well, why don't you find out what the position does before you turn it down? So I read the job description closely, and I discovered it was responsible for the Office of Offshore Leasing Policy. And so began my adventure in 1981 with the oil and gas industry. The offshore oil program then was extremely profitable. It was generating about $14 billion a year in 1981 dollars. It was a lot of money, but it was very, very controversial. After the Santa Barbara oil spill, the environmentalists wanted to shut the program down, which I thought was a very bad idea. But you also had, frankly, the right-wingers and some people in industry who said we should just give all the offshore resources to the industry. Not only was that illegal, but it was a very bad idea as well. There were endless, constant battles. If you trust me, the offshore business, with the exception of sort of the darkest moments of Macondo, were nothing like what we went through. It was constant battles. And I realized that the key, and I'm very interested, I wrote this before I listened to the session earlier, that the key was to protect the license to operate, the political legitimacy for the program to proceed. So my obsession then, and this conference, is really all about license to operate, and it's changing. My partner in all of this was a woman who was the Assistant Attorney General for Lands, and a woman named Carol Dinkins, who was great. And we were kind of like Indian fighters we were tied back to back, and there was so much controversy, and we were fighting endless attacks, but we survived, and we developed the third five-year leasing plan, which opened up the Gulf of Mexico to area-wide leasing, which in turn really opened up the deep water. And for me, it was really an interesting and exciting time. Along the way, I developed deep respect and affection for my colleagues in the offshore in the Interior Department. Scandals erupted during that time about Indian royalties, and also it was combined with issues relating to the complicated leasing structure that we had, different areas of the government, that we created the Minerals Management Service. And that was a system that was in place for about 25 years. When Macondo hit, I was shocked and really disgusted to see how some of the senior officials in the Department of Interior and in the White House threw the MMS people under the bus, dredging up claims from Indian royalties, which were literally 25 years old and had taken place in Denver. It had absolutely nothing to do with the offshore. Then when it became clear that the MMS staff were not at fault, no apology was issued. And one can see, frankly, why the public holds politicians in such contempt. A change was necessary, but I don't think you should blame competent people who were doing the job they were asked to do. I feel quite strongly, and I really have a lot of admiration for the MMS people. After Macondo, I was the lead-off witness in Washington before the Spill Commission. I thought about what went wrong and why. I defer to you. You all are the experts. The conversation before when I came in I thought was very thoughtful, excellent. But I became convinced that the static prescriptive approach where essentially everything is permitted unless specifically prohibited, that this approach to offshore regulation just no longer worked. And I believe in the dynamic, performance-based approach of safety case, which made much more sense. Safety case is defined as reducing the risk of harm so far as reasonably possible, and to demonstrate an understanding and adequate management of that risk. It's a proactive approach as opposed to a reactive approach. I know you all have been spending a lot of time about it, but I think it's really a very fundamental difference, and it's one which still a lot of people in Washington don't understand. I spent a lot of time in the oil and gas business since I left the Interior Department. I chair an offshore drilling company. I'm a director of an international integrated oil and gas company with offshore operations. In my former firm, PFC Energy, advised many companies and governments around the world. And I learned something very fundamental along the way, all those years and all those miles. And that was that as you look around the world, you go to these various countries, it's their oil. And if you don't understand what they think and what their aspirations are, you're going to have problems. And some of our oil company clients, for which I was very grateful, they really didn't think it was their oil. They thought that the oil was the oil company's oil under somebody else's sand or water. And that's just not the way it really operates. I believe that it's unrealistic to expect small, underfunded government agencies to carry the principal burden of regulating the most capital-intensive, technically complex, environmentally sensitive industry in the world. The cost and complexity of one platform dwarfs the resources of an entire agency. I think it's critical to shift the burden, not to reduce safety, but to recognize the level and diversity of technology and the economic resources available in the industry. Particularly after Macondo, the industry cannot permit failure. They cannot let it happen, or they're going to lose their own license to operate as well as the industry as a whole. The financial and reputational risks have proven staggering. I believe the fundamental challenge all regulators face is the potential mismatch between very dynamic business processes and static regulatory systems. In every business, there's a trade-off between production and safety. In every business, whether it's the cruise ship business or airlines or pharmaceuticals or whatever. The offshore industry progresses and meets the growing global demand for oil and gas by constantly advancing the barriers of what is possible and safe. A static regulatory system cannot keep up with this dynamic environment. Static prescriptive regulations result in static prescriptive safety practices. What we need in safety is the same dynamic paradigm the best companies use to ensure quality. Some key features of this are everyone's responsible for safety. Safety is cultural, a way of thinking through and anticipating potential problems that affect activities. It's about active performance rather than defensive compliance. Responsibility lies with the operators and their contractors and suppliers. Regulators supervise and audit rather than inspect and approve. The goal is not good enough, but zero failure. No accidents, no fatalities, no spills. Safety encompasses not only personal safety, but safety of the entire process. Frankly, that's where I think things got in trouble in the Gulf of Mexico, including environmental safety. We design, implement, and audit performance management systems rather than rules. There's active collaboration, trust, and sharing between operators, contractors, employees, and regulators. This is another area where things broke down. We see mistakes and near misses as opportunities to learn rather than occasions to finger the guilty or, even worse, cover up systemic weaknesses. We have greater transparency between different operators, contractors, and regulators to accelerate that kind of learning. Organizational structures and motivation and compensation systems promote safety rather than undermining it. We have seamless, unified systems that cover operators and contractors, not marine systems for rigs and boats and different ones for platforms, and not patchworks of federal and state or regional rules that have played off against one another. The industry has been very criticized for what's happened in the Gulf of Mexico. I think the industry has had quite a good record in the deep water Gulf of Mexico. I think when you go into shallow water and state water, what has happened, what the industry did over a 50 or 60 year period is a travesty, and for which it really hasn't been held accountable. Regulations are not fixed directives, but approaches the flexibility to accommodate changing solutions and situations in a process of continuous improvement. And again, in sophisticated, well-run companies that are obsessed with quality, this notion of continuous improvement and adjustment addresses new risks, which will always arise from new technology and from adapting older installations to do things that were not imagined when they were first designed. I'm not advocating self-regulation. Making contractors actively responsible under vigilant supervision of well-designed and well-resourced regulatory system is not the same thing as just letting the industry regulate itself. That's about the fastest way to lose the license to regulate, I can imagine. It requires competent and timely supervision by regulators who understand the risk of the operation and can properly evaluate the mitigations the operators propose. I might add that, and I've thought about this a lot, that the resources of regulators versus regulated in other industries, notably finance and securities, are even more disproportionate. Unreasonable demands are placed on government, who are blamed if something goes wrong. Small agencies are being asked to regulate trillion-dollar industries who are gaming the regulator. Instead, shift the burden to high performance by those regulated and ruthlessly, and I mean ruthlessly, hold them accountable if mistakes are made, including individuals. Regulators, like the industry, must recognize the state of crisis confronting the oil industry over costs. I do a lot of work with boards and senior management of oil companies. They're obsessed with cost. And frankly, the cost of safety has to reflect this sensitivity as well. Lower oil prices have made offshore plays, many offshore plays, particularly in the deep water, uneconomic. New ways must be found to maintain or increase safety while reducing cost. Generally, the private sector is better off at this than public bureaucracies. I repeat, however, that I'm not at any time suggesting a decrease in safeguards, but you must be sensitive to cost because it's happening. Let me give you just a small example. Some young entrepreneurs from a company called Meridian Ocean Services. I have no financial interest in Meridian Ocean Services, so I'm not plugging anything. Came to see me about new techniques they have in the development to employ small ROVs, remote operating vehicles, replacing the need for divers in several aspects of maintenance and quality assurance on platforms. And this can involve tens of millions of dollars on a single platform. And obviously, regulators have to be satisfied that this procedure is safe and effective. If it is, I hope that you all will be open-minded and encourage initiatives such as this. The industry has to develop, the regulators have to understand it, and both sides really have to employ it. Finally, oil prices have slowed activity, but prices aren't going to stay low forever. The lower and longer prices stay down, the greater the probability they will fly up, which is going to create new, urgent demand for effective, efficient regulation. Simultaneously, new technology will be introduced. I hope you'll be ready, because it's going to come. It is coming. And if you're not ready, I think that you can do the industry and yourselves a lot of harm. In closing, although much has changed, your job today is the same as mine long ago and far away. And I was very interested by the earlier discussion. And that is to assure the license to operate and regulate the offshore. The public and politicians will look to you to provide the expertise to regulate that license. Millions of jobs and billions of dollars, plus our energy security, are at stake. It's enormous responsibility and a huge challenge. But part of that challenge is you're going to have to deal with what I call either uncritical lovers or unloving critics. The uncritical lovers are those who want to give industry a blank check. Just let them go do it. There's some people in the industry will tell you, just leave it to us, we'll take care of it. That is obviously unacceptable. But you also have unloving critics who want you to prove a negative, which in logic you cannot do. And that is that there are no risks whatsoever in offshore operations. So the challenge is going to be how to manage those risks as effectively as possible, and to challenge those critics, and whether it's onshore or offshore, because they're going to be there. They are not your friends, and they will try and organize every debate to prove a negative. And as I say, that's very difficult to do. At any rate, on that note, I hope your experience in the international oil and gas business is as much fun as my experience has been. I've enjoyed it very much, and I hope it's in the next 30 years as satisfying as mine been the last 30 years. And so on that note, thank you.
So I wonder if you'll sit with me and take
Sure.
a few questions. We can move some
Got to
of
move
the-
all the stuff.
Move all the stuff. I actually have this great, we don't generally give gifts, a great